Today I'm going to share how to simply paint a Necron Canoptek Tomb Stalker. You can use this for all of your Necrons, and I'm going to show you how to weather them. It's coming right up.
Necrons!
Nick speaking, and welcome to this video. Right, here we go. Today I'm painting my converted Canoptek Tomb Sentinel stroke Tomb Stalker. I made this miniature from 3 Necron Wraiths. I've got the conversion video on the channel already, and I'll link that up for you at the end of this video. But today we're going to paint it. My paint scheme is really simple, but it's easy to do. I'm going to mainly be dry brushing. Now, to dry brush you want a nice soft brush. Because this miniature is quite big, I'm going to use a big soft brush and a small soft brush. Starting with the big brush, I'm going to dry brush with Iron Breaker. Now, you don't have to use an actual dry brush for this. It can be any brush as long as it's got really soft bristles. I know some people use a makeup brush, for example. The key thing is to have some soft bristles. So you put the paint onto your brush, and then you take the paint off of your brush using a cloth or a tissue. I actually use both. I use the cloth first, and then I take the final paint off with the tissue. Once you've taken the paint off, you then just lightly brush over your miniature. What happens is all of the raised areas get hit by the paint. And the idea is that you just gradually build this up. You don't want too much paint on the brush that you get blotchy results. You want to just gradually build up the paint using this technique. Now, I have a scenic base for my miniature, which is basically a big monolith section, so I'm going to be painting this as well. Now, I was slightly concerned I would have no contrast between the base and the miniature, which is why I decided to weather the base, just to add that extra contrast. My weathering techniques are also very easy, so stay tuned for those. Now, of course, the bigger the piece that you're painting, the more beneficial it's going to be to use a big paint brush. Now, I do use a small paint brush as well. It's the Games Workshop dry brush, but again, any small soft brush will do. But I do like the Games Workshop dry brushes, especially the new white haired ones. They seem pretty good and they last quite a long time. With the small brush, I just go into all of the smaller areas, again just dry brushing exactly the same way as I did with the big brush. Now, I go over the miniature twice with this colour, and of course the other advantage of dry brushing is all of the recesses don't get hit with this colour, so you end up with black recesses. This means that we don't have to wash the miniature because we've got natural shadows. Now, with my particular paint scheme, all of my guns are black, especially the front of the guns. Now, I haven't painted these particular guns before, so I actually dry brushed the whole of the back of the area of the gun, but actually later I decided to go back to black. No, that is not an Amy Winehouse reference, but I do change my mind and I do go back to black on the whole of the guns, apart from the wires. Okay, so next it's lead belcher. Now, you may notice I'm using a wet palette for my paint. This is just an easy homemade one for free. Just a Chinese takeaway tub, a sponge, a piece of tissue paper, and then some perchant paper or greaseproof paper on the top. It keeps the paint wet for longer. Okay, so all I'm doing now is basically dry brushing over the top of the previous colour with this colour. Now, for reference, I'm not adding any water to the paint when I'm dry brushing. I find you just don't need it. I'm going to repeat what I did previously with the big brush, and then again with the small brush, all over and 2 coats. Okay, so next it's Runefang Steel, and the idea of having all of these different silver paints is to build up the silver colour to give you quite a natural metal look, a sort of mottled metal look. Now, with the Mithril Silver, I do only put it on the claws, and I only put it on the front claws, the claws which in my mind's eye are going to attack my enemy. So to make those attacks look really dangerous and sharp, that's where I use the Mithril Silver. So I dry brush this on the tips of the front claws. Okay, next it's Warpstone Green, and I use green with my Necrons, but at this stage you can use any colour that you like. I just like the traditional green. So I'm going to use Warpstone green. I have watered this down with a couple of drops of water. I'm now going to paint all of the orbs and anything that I want green. I'm going to do 2 or 3 thin coats of paint just to build up the colour. Now this does include the energy section at the back of the gun, but not the area where the green rod would normally sit. I actually paint this section with Caliban green. Again, just a couple of coats just to build up the colour. Okay, so now we're going to highlight all of the green, and we're going to use Mute green. This is a really nice green, previously called Scorpion green, one of my favourite greens for Necrons. And we're going to again add a bit of water to the paint, and we're going to paint over all of the areas that we've already painted, but we're going to leave the original colour on the outside edges to give us some nice depth. Again, we're going to build up the colour with 2 or 3 coats just to make the colour look bright, but also to make the paint look smooth and not blotchy. Now regarding the green rod in the gun, I use this colour straight on top of the Caliban green, and all I do is I paint all of the raised areas with this colour. Again, 2 or 3 coats just to build up the colour. This is probably the hardest piece to do on my particular miniature. However, that's because I have quite a hard paint scheme for my guns. You could easily choose a different paint scheme which is easier to paint. It's just how I do my guns, because I like them to look a little bit like they are an actual green rod, because I like green rods. Okay, so next we're going to use gold, and I'm using Shining Gold here, which is my really old school paint. However, you can paint it any gold that you wish. I'm going to paint little symbols on the sort of knee joints of the legs, or the elbow joints of the legs, whatever you want to call it. There's a tiny little symbol there with an orb. Now the idea again for painting these sections on the legs is to help with the contrast between the silver miniature and the silver base. I did consider painting the monolith a different colour, but my monoliths are silver and I wanted it to sort of match my army. It could have been a monolith from a different dynasty maybe and had a different colour, but I didn't really want to do that, so I didn't. Right, next up we are painting the monolith. Right, next up I'm painting the gun of the monolith, and again it's with black because I have black guns. So I go over the monolith gun with black. I also decide at this stage to repaint over the silver sections of the small guns that the miniature has. My miniature is magnetised, so I can have both the Sentinel and the Tomb Stalker. Again, the tutorial on how I did that will be linked up at the end of this video. Now as I've got the black paint on my wet palette, I also painted the sand on the base as well. Just 2 coats, watered down quite a bit so that it gets into all the nooks and crannies of the sand. Next I'm going to highlight the black with Ironbreaker, just a very gentle dry brush over the black. We don't want to dry brush too much and actually turn it silver. Just a few highlights here and there of the black sections of the guns. Okay, so now we're ready to weather the base, and I've done quite a bit of weathering over the years on some of my armies. My space wolves, for example, they're quite weathered, and this technique works really well. It is very simple to do, but it still looks pretty cool. Now what you need is a pretty dark brown and a slightly lighter brown. We're going to start with the lighter brown, and that is Morphang brown. And I'm going to do some dry brushing. Now the idea here is to imagine that the edges that we've got, which we want to be weathered, are going to be sort of burnt. So we're going to have the lighter brown on the outer edges, and then we're going to go inwards with the darker brown. So we want this light brown to be fairly spaced out from the edges, not too spaced out, but fairly spaced out. Just enough so that we can see the coloration as we change from one brown to the next. Again, just lightly dry brush this in the areas that you want to weather. Once you finish that, then we're going to repeat the process with the darker brown. This is going to be Rhinox hide. And again, we're going to dry brush just those areas that we want to be weathered, but we're going to do the inner edge and leave the original dry brush on the outside edge. And we're just going to gradually build up the colour to give us this sort of burnt look. Now once you've done this all over, we're going to go in with one more dry brush, just a light dry brush with black. So we're going to go on the very edges with this colour. And this again will give us some variation and also make the metal look quite burnt. Now that's the weathering done. However, of course, you would see some silver still over those areas that we've just dry brushed. So what you could do is go in with a very small paintbrush and just paint in some chips, maybe where the silver would be with a silver colour, or like I'm going to do to make things really simple and easy, is I'm just going to dry brush with lead belcher, and I'm just going to dry brush all over the areas that we've just weathered. Just a light dry brush just so that we can see some metal coming through all of that weathering. Okay, so lastly I just paint my Canoptek head white. I always have white faces on my Canoptek units. I'm going to thin this paint down quite a bit, and I'm going to paint quite a few coats, around 5 or 6 coats of paint, just to build up the white and make it look really nice. And then all I've got to do is finish off the base. I dry brush the sand with Dawnstone Grey, then I paint the rim of the base with black. And then finally, using plastic glue, I carefully glue the miniature to the base. Now of course gluing after painting can be problematic, so I did have to sort of touch up a little bit, but nothing too disastrous. And here is the miniature all finished. I'm super happy with it. Of course, I have added the green rods, the green sections to the monolith, again helping with that contrast. I'm really liking how the monolith base is looking. I think it is enough contrast with all of that weathering to the actual miniature, and I think it looks pretty cool. As I said, this miniature is magnetised from the Tomb Stalker to the Tomb Sentinel. I think both look really cool. I'm so happy with this miniature and I can't wait to play it. I'll be really interested what you think of the miniature now that it's painted. Let me know in the comments box below. If you're not subscribed yet, then please give me a sub. I'd really appreciate it. You can become a member if you want to support the channel as well. Again, any memberships is much appreciated. In the meantime, here is the videos that I was talking about during this video, and here is a playlist of me painting all of my other Necron units.